Welcome, everybody. I am so excited. And as Rana herself admits, every time I talk, whether in front of a camera or on stage in front of a live audience, no matter how many years I've been doing it, I get butterflies in my stomach. And today is no exception to that. I'm super excited because I've missed you, Rana.
I know.
I've been missing talking to you. And so I'm so honored that you agreed to join us and have time on your schedule. We met a couple years ago in Cambridge, and we've really enjoyed each other's company since. And I've been absolutely blown away and inspired by everything that you do. So I look forward to today's conversation. I'll introduce you briefly so our audience who are joining from around the globe know a little bit more about you if they don't know already. I will repeatedly encourage them to read the book that I was inspired by so
Can you
much.
please show everybody the stickies you have? Because I was like, whoa.
Lots of good pointers to interesting observations that I learned even more about you from. And some of our participants are going to get the book too from registering early. But let me introduce you formally, a little bit formally, not that formally, and then we'll dig into some questions, okay? So the question that you pose to the world is really, what if our devices could interpret and respond to our emotions? And I am so honored to be joined here today by Dr. Rana El Kaliouby. Rana El Kalobi, Dr. El Kaliouby, is Egyptian American, a computer scientist and entrepreneur. She is born and raised in Cairo, and she received her bachelor and master's degree from the American University in Cairo and earned a PhD from the University of Cambridge. Rana is on a mission to humanize technology with artificial emotional intelligence, or emotion AI. She is the co-founder, together with Rosalind Picard, of a startup called Affectiva, founded in 2009. Rana and her colleagues invented cutting-edge technology software that analyzes complex and nuanced emotions and cognitive states from human faces and voices. The Affectiva tool can help autistic kids learn how to interact and interpret social cues. It can help cars detect when drivers are looking a little bit drowsy. It can help detect signals for early stage Alzheimer's disease. It can offer market studies for advertising companies and so much more. Prior to founding Affectiva, Rana was a research scientist at the MIT Media Lab, and she spearheaded the development of applications for facial coding to benefit mental health, autism, and other research areas. Rana's research moves us beyond the dependency on exaggerated expressions modeled by actors to more subtle glances found in real situations when all of us are looking at our mobile phones, for instance. As her popular TED Talk makes it very clear, and I encourage you to watch it if you haven't, Rana herself is a fabulous speaker, and she is a role model and exceptional in translating very complex AI and technology accessible to any audience. She has recently authored this amazing book, and she has won considerable number, I can't even list them, of awards for her work, from the 2015 Ingenuity Award from the Smithsonian, MIT Technology Review's Top 35 Innovators Under 35. She's on the Thinkers 50 radar list for management thinkers, Wired 25 Geniuses Who Create the Future of Business, Most Powerful Women to Watch, and most recently, she's a finalist in Women Tech Network of Speaker of the Year Award. Blown away by your accomplishments, and congratulations for everything, Rana, that you have been doing. I wanted to start by asking you, how are you doing? We haven't seen each other. How have you been over the past few months?
First of all, thank you for this incredible introduction. And it's a real honor to be having this conversation. And I look forward to an interactive dialogue and catching up, but also hearing from everybody in the audience. So welcome everybody if you're joining from wherever you are. How am I? It's been tough. First of all, I'll start just by, I'm grateful my family is well and we're all healthy. So thank goodness for that, right?
Yes.
But this thing is stretching on and it's dragging on. And I think we just have to have very open conversations on how we're doing and how our teams are doing and talk about mental health and self-care and all of that. So I literally had a team meeting earlier today where we had just a very vulnerable and open conversation around, okay, what are we doing to create space and boundaries? Because otherwise you find yourself, on Zoom calls all day long. And,
I know.
and so, yeah. How are you?
The same. I think that we're all feeling kind of the same pressures. I think academia and business have that in common, that our lives have morphed into just a big continuous Zoom call, whether it's family connections are on Zoom or businesses on Zoom. So it's a little bit of Groundhog Day too. And your kids are okay? They're doing schooling from home, or
My son is 11. He, thank goodness, goes into school. And my daughter does 1 week on, 1 week off, which she actually likes. She's a senior in high school, and I think she's appreciating the space. She's doing a lot of baking, like a lot of baking. I think it's her way of managing stress. So I'll take it.
That's great for you. Enjoy the benefits of that. My daughter, who's also week on, week off, she made an interesting observation that it feels like every week she's missing the other school, whether that like the other school. When she's at school, she misses being at home. When she's at home, she misses being at school. So it's something to look forward to. So it's kind of nice. Kids always have a nice way to look at the bright side of things.
Totally. Very resilient. Yes.
How is Affectiva doing during the crisis? Has it changed things dramatically for you guys, or how have you been working?
It was definitely a slowdown kind of in the early summer. A lot of our business is tied to the automotive industry and also the advertising industry, and both. I mean, the automotive industry came to almost a complete halt in the spring. So there's some ramifications of that, but we're seeing the business, ramp back up again. The team is staying very motivated and productive, which I'm super grateful for. So I think by and large, we're doing fine. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few months as we get into 2021 and, what does the world look like?
Yeah, well, I wish you good luck with that. And I hope that indeed things pick up and continue to flourish for you professionally. Let's dig in. I have some curious questions and feel free to ask me back. You grew up in Egypt and there you report, or I know too, that there's actually, interestingly, an equal number of female and male students who study computer science, for instance, maybe at the undergrad level. But here in the US, we don't see that as much. And I'm curious if you've ever thought about why that might be the case. Like the differences or the departure in STEM areas happens early on here. And I'm curious as to why that's different in the Middle East than it is here.
Yeah. And, I never thought about that because, I went to the American University in Cairo, studied computer science as an undergrad. And as you said, like there was just like, it was balanced. Now, as I reflect back on my experience, even though it was balanced at the undergraduate level, the higher up the chain you went, there was less and less female representation. So for example, out of a faculty of maybe 20 or so male faculty members in the computer science department, there was only one female tenured faculty. And she became my mentor and role model. So as I look back, I give her a lot of credit for almost implicitly, right, being my role model and showing me that, oh, yes, you can do this without having to say anything. So even, so I think it is interesting that this problem manifests earlier in the United States. I don't know why. I think there's a lot of emphasis on academics back in the Middle East, and a lot of just girls tend to study harder, and right, and just be more. I don't want to say more driven or more ambitious, but there's definitely that piece of it, right? You just like throw yourself into your studies, kind of thing. I don't know. Do you grow up in Israel, right?
Yeah, and I studied industrial engineering, where also it was one of those engineering degrees that had a 50-50 representation. And I don't know if I knew that going in, or it was why I loved it so much, but it was one that definitely had that balance and mix. And as I think about trying to work with diversity and gender from the earlier, or let's say the undergraduate level, it strikes me that even at that level, there's certain opt-in, opt-out opportunities for boys and girls, male and female students alike. And, maybe computer science is stigmatized more in one part of the world as more of a male dominant environment than others. But
also, as I was writing this book, I had to dig in. It's a memoir, so I talk a lot about my family and my upbringing, and so I had to interview my parents to just get a sense of like their life and how they met. So my parents met at a computer programming class. My dad taught COBOL programming.
Yeah.
So for anybody who's on listening in, COBOL is an obsolete programming language, but it powered a lot of the systems back in the 70s and 80s. And my mom was one of the very first females who decided to kind of, she was curious about programming, and she joined this class. It was an evening class, and was fascinated by it. And that was how she and my dad got together and got married. So I grew up in a household that was very pro technology, state of the art devices all the time. And again, it was implicit, but my mom was probably one of the first females in technology in the Middle East. So it's all these things that you don't think about until you have to think about and realize how it influences you, right?
It's incredible. As you were just describing that, I'm one of three sisters. You're one of three sisters. I actually made a list of things that we have in common, and that this is not one of them on my list. Now I realize that, of course, I should have.
Where are you in the order?
I'm not the first. I'm the middle. I'm the sandwich. But it's interesting that maybe the fact that we grew up in a household with only female siblings, and your parents being so tech driven, maybe it was obvious to them that the three of you may embrace that field too. It's just that might carve our path too, right? The siblings that we grow up among and what their tendencies might be.
Absolutely. I mean, again, one of my first earlier memories, we grew up in Kuwait, like born in Cairo, but my parents moved to Kuwait for work. And I remember distinctly overhearing my uncle tell my dad, well, you have 3 daughters. Like, why are you investing in their education like that? They're just going to grow up, become housewives, get married, And I was so scared that my dad would listen to him and like pull us out of school or something. And my dad didn't. So I give my parents credit for just being so committed to our education and empowering us to kind of chart our own path, even though there were a lot of cultural tensions. But I think my parents, at the end of the day, really supported our passions.
It's interesting that you brought up the living in Kuwait. Among the things that I listed when we met a couple of years ago, I think I made a statement then that the only thing that I aspire to have in common with you is the fact that we both really appreciate smiles and smiling ourselves. You have a whole philosophy around smiles in general, but I've since learned that we have a lot in common. So not only are we both, among 3 sisters, but also the war in the Gulf, the first Gulf War, affected our lives pretty substantially. For you as a youngster moving back to Egypt and back and forth, and your father having to go back and forth. And I was not on the other side of things, actually, but in a different position. I was growing up in Israel. I was in high school at the time, and we had our own involvement in it. So I was kind of reflecting on my childhood and how that was reflected. We were both born in the 70s. Don't say that. So that we have in common. Shania Twain sang for us our first dance at both of our weddings.
No way.
Okay. I could not make this up. We both had our first baby during our PhD studies. We both have a boy and a girl. We have a passion for promoting inclusivity and diversity. We have some story, yours is much more glorious, but we were both affected by the TED Women Conference phenomenon and how and interacted with that. And I can tell you more about my interaction with it.
Tell us.
So you had your first TED Talk through the TED Women. I think it was in Montreal, if I'm not mistaken.
Monterey.
What a location. And it really shaped you moving forward, I think, in many ways, and gave you certain confidence. I chose to use the TED Women Conference as a way to inspire some of our female MBA students. So I took a few on a trip. I did this a whole year course where I engaged with them through our dialogue around role models. And we went to DC for an event, and we experienced the event together over many days. And it's a very emotional conference, as you know, and we all connected with various stories in that conference, and it led to a bunch of dialogues. And then we hosted the TED Women here at Darden. You can host it locally and have viewing parties. So we hosted it too. And it just gave me an avenue to connect with the students. And I found it a very meaningful conference. So I found that interesting. We both talk about balancing mom guilt with like our position. So for you, that's a CEO of a startup. And for me, that's an academic where our lives never end, right? You can always be an academic 24 hours a day. So those are some things that I
Double click on some of these, right? Like these are big topics. Yeah.
big topics. And so I just wanted to use that long intro to ask you, do you often find yourself thinking that you're very different or share very little in common with someone, and then you actually find out that you actually have a lot more in common than you thought initially? Does that happen to you? How do you kind of think about that?
So you know what? This book has made me realize that I have so much more in common with people, almost people I've never connected with than I ever thought before. And I'm so grateful for that. This is my first book. So my expectation was I would spend, a fair amount of time writing the book and then launching the book, and that would be the end of it. And what I found is that the book was the beginning. It was the beginning of new friendships, new connections. And like you, people kind of reading the book and saying, oh my God, like sang first dance song in my wedding, right? Like no matter how big or small the point of connection is, it just for me highlighted, my entire kind of career was, even though I'm in the business of artificial intelligence, it's actually about human connection and how can we affect human connection through technology or not. And I've just found that the book has sparked so many new conversations and connections and friendships. So I'm so grateful for that.
That's wonderful. I often find that we often think about differences that we have with people that we meet, but sometimes spending time thinking about commonalities gets us thinking new directions, right? Like it jumps a different conversation that we wouldn't otherwise have. So I think maybe if I tie it to tech and to what you're doing at Affectiva, I think you stumbled upon the idea that the study of autism has a lot in common with what you were trying to do early on in your PhD, and something that seems so different from computer science and AI. And at the time, it wasn't even dubbed as AI, but it seemed so far removed. And suddenly, you find so much commonality. Like, how did that shape your direction as a scientist, even?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that innovation happens at the intersection of disciplines. And so you have to kind of take yourself outside of your comfort zone, whatever your discipline is. And, I was studying computer science as a PhD student at Cambridge University. And the very first talk I gave kind of to my peers and faculty, I posed the challenge. I said, I want to teach my computer to read my emotions, read my facial expressions, and here's why it's challenging, da, 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 da. And at the end of the talk, this other PhD student, Rob Haig, raised his hand and he said, you ought to look at autism. This was way back in 2000. And he said, my brother has autism and has very much of the same challenges you're talking about. Like he finds it really hard to make face contact or eye contact or read all of these nonverbal signals. And so I made note, and later that night, I went online, and sure enough, the top autism research center ended up being at Cambridge. Professor Simon Baring-Cohen, who is Sacha Baron Cohen's Borat's cousin. I always tease him. I'm like, that's like your true claim to fame, right? Not that you're like this amazing Cambridge professor. But I cold emailed him and I said, I'm trying to teach my machine to have emotional intelligence. And he took the meeting, and it turns out, totally serendipitously, he was building this humongous database to teach kids how to read facial and vocal expressions. He had spent millions and millions of British pounds doing this. And for me to be a successful PhD, successful in my PhD, I would have had to replicate all of this work. And I didn't have the money or the time. And so I asked him, would you be up for sharing this data set? And he said, absolutely. And it ended up kind of inspiring my work, obviously was super helpful in terms of building these algorithms. But it made me realize that it's not just about improving human machine interfaces. I could then take this technology and pay it forward by helping kids on the autism spectrum. And that ended up being the project that brought me over to MIT Media Lab.
And so it's amazing because without that diversity in terms of an inspiration, and it's not maybe the obvious diversity that we typically think about in terms of demographics or background, but it's a disciplinary diversity. Without that, you wouldn't have made that leap progression, right?
Absolutely. And I think when we talk about diversity, it's not just gender, it's not just ethnicity. It's diversity of experiences, diversity of thought, of backgrounds. Like I always say, You don't have to be a machine learning scientist to be in the AI field. You can be a philosopher, right? Because we need people to think about ethics and morality. So I'm a huge advocate. And can I add one more thing?
Of course.
You'll appreciate that. So Simon, one of Simon's PhD students at the time, was Israeli. And Simon kind of secretly wanted to kind of bring, this Egyptian PhD or this Israeli PhD, and he it was so interesting because we were solving for the same problem but coming at it from very different angles. So he wanted to it was his own way of propagating world peace, I suppose. Which was just fun. So yeah, diversity across all the parameters, right, is really key.
As you were describing that, I'm thinking maybe that's like another secret motive that helps us continue to push towards our goal. Like it gives you, I know that it didn't necessarily matter for your technology work, but maybe the fact that you did have an opportunity to collaborate with somebody that you wouldn't normally collaborate, maybe that pushed you in some way. I'm reflecting on my own experiences. I've participated in multiple Palestinian-Israeli activities, and sometimes they're very, they have nothing to do necessarily with that interaction. They have to do with art project or something, depending on the forum. But you're more driven to accomplish a goal because you also recognize how special that moment is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Is it hard? So you're a CEO, you're leading a startup, not so small anymore, 150. How large is?
We're about 100 people. Yeah.
100 people. Is it hard to accomplish the diversity and the inclusivity that you're hoping to accomplish? Like, is it something that you constantly have to monitor? Or are there instruments that you can put in place to kind of feel like you've got it under control? How do you think about it?
I think you have to be really intentional. I'm not where I want us to be as a company, to be honest, but it's something that we always think about. It's something that, as I think we totally share this in common. We're very passionate about it. For me, diversity and inclusion are almost two different things, right? Like diversity, we need these diversity across age, gender. So for example, we have a super awesome summer training program and summer internship program where we bring young people, including high school kids, to intern with us over the summer. Now they learn a lot, but we learn a lot too, right? Because I believe that we need to be inclusive and bring youth into the dialogue, because it's, they're going to be the main kind of users of this technology as we develop it. So for me, that's really important. And we continuously think about how do we improve that? How do we tap into a pipeline, that's not your typical pipeline of candidates, right? So again, over the summer for our training program, we said we're going to relax some of the criteria. You don't have to know Python. You don't have to know, convolutional neural networks to apply. But if you're driven and ambitious and smart, we're going to take you on and we're going to teach you. And I mean, these kids ended up doing a makeathon where they built incredible projects with our technology, like everything from smart fridges to like mental health promoting mirrors to like video conferencing that that has emotion AI integrated in it. Amazing ideas and super diverse. Socioeconomically, I mean, we tapped into kids who would not have thought to apply to Affectiva. So these are all very important. It's important to me that as we build AI and the future of technology, which is going to transform the way we do everything, right? Yeah. That we think about access to these opportunities and we're not leaving people behind, right?
Yeah, so I think that you're touching upon the dual reason for the title of the session, right? That I think in what you just said, you mentioned both things, how you, in terms of the company, benefit from having multiple perspectives of various individuals that you wouldn't have access to before to improve the products that you're developing or the ideas that you're coming up with. But also at the same time, you have the agenda to help and reach a lot of individuals around the world with your products and with the goodness that comes with the developments that you offer, right? And I can see that dual mission. You're constantly balancing that. That must be really hard to do.
But I believe.
Yeah, maybe rewarding. I don't know. I don't want to speak for you, but
it's definitely rewarding. But I also think it's this new. The World Economic Forum just came up with this new framework for responsible leadership. And one of, there's 5 tenets or whatever. And one of them is stakeholder inclusion. And they're basically advocating for increasing your scope of who's your stakeholder. It's not just your investors or shareholders or your team or partners or clients. It's the community at large. And I'm such a big believer of that. And it's influenced how I spend my time as a CEO and how I advocate for the ethical development and deployment of AI and diversity and inclusion. So how about you? Like, how do you think about diversity in your field? And how do you?
It's a great, so I'll link it together. So it's a perfect segue because you mentioned stakeholders and how we think about our stakeholders. So one of the really thought leaders and the first individuals who back in the 80s was crying out for stakeholder theory and developed stakeholder theory is a colleague of mine, literally the door across the hall from me in the office. And his name is Professor Ed Freeman. And at Darden, we are very much value-oriented and mission-oriented school where we think about our community. So you and I last met when we were sitting at the faculty lounge at Harvard Business School, where I visited for a couple of years. Like Harvard, we teach with the case method, and we rely heavily on conversation. Like we walk into the classroom and we build upon ideas from the students in the room. And if you have a classroom of 60 students that have the same background, you're just not going to get very far. And I don't mean background necessarily, again, to your point, not necessarily demographics or gender or ethnicity even. Of course, you need all of those, but you need diversity of thought. And so on the teaching level, it's top of our mind to have a diverse set of opinions and different perspectives. And I want to make sure that I know who comes from, so I can pull them into the conversation. I want to learn their background so I can be inspired by them to progress the conversation. So that's on the teaching side. On the research side, I'll be pretty technical and geeky a little bit. I know that with you, that's okay. I do a lot of my research on the wisdom of crowds and forecasting. And as you know, at the heart of a lot of machine learning algorithms is this idea of ensembling and putting multiple perspectives together. And if you're going to do an ensemble, you got to have diverse forecasts. You need that diversity built in. You need to almost by design decorrelate your individual forecasts so you gain some momentum by combining opinions. And so I see it just seep in technical ways, but also in very meaningful ways in the classroom.
So I want to build on that because you touch on one of the, I always say, of course, building a diverse team is the right thing to do morally and socially, but it's also the right business imperative because the only way we mitigate bias in our algorithms is if we have these diverse brains around the table designing and developing these algorithms. And I'll share with you one example. We work with automotive companies, and in our field, it's all about the diversity of the data. So if we train our smile classifier or our drowsiness classifier on, middle-aged white guys, it's just going to recognize middle-aged white guys, and it won't recognize people who look like me or you. And we were working with this luxury automaker in Europe, and they sent us a data set to test our algorithms on. And that data set was literally like maybe, 100 or so videos. They have an Eastern European research presence. And it was basically like just blonde, blue-eyed, like guys driving these cars around. And they wanted us to test the algorithms. The algorithm would have done just fine. But I took a look at the data and I said, we have a decision to make here. We could just run the algorithms, look great, get paid, move on. Or we send the data back and basically say, hey guys, you are a multinational global automaker. These are not like your drivers don't all look like that, right?
Fascinating.
And so we did that. And it was a risky move for little Affectiva, the startup, right? But I felt like it was the right thing to do. And of course we did it in a very collaborative, educational way, right? But it just underscored for me how we accidentally build bias into AI is unintentional. It's just our blind spots, right? They didn't think to bring more women in, or maybe people who have black skin, or, I don't know, wearing glasses or have beards.
Right.
So the more diverse people you have around the table, you can spot these blind spots.
What was their reaction when you asked them to do that? Did they say, "Oh, of course," and they went out?
Yeah, they were like, "Oh, duh, let's go back and collect a more global data set," and we did that. And I think that kind of set a higher bar for the whole industry. And we keep evangelizing and moving the industry forward. And I think we have to do it, even though it's harder for a smaller business like ours to do that. But I think it's so the right thing to do.
But it's interesting because as you describe that, I'm reminded, and I had a question actually written down around the fact that from a technical perspective, again, going back to your point, you are actually creating for yourself more work. I think you reported one time early on in your development of your product, there were some instances in China where certain smiles were not being translated properly because of the conditions under which subjects were watching the videos. And so you had to go back and analyze and rethink about it. So it's creating extra work, right?
Totally.
The desire to have your system support everybody and reach, very interesting subpopulations. How do you justify in your head and also on your balance sheet? How do you justify the extra work? I'm curious.
I actually, like a couple of years ago, I started tying our bonuses not just to like driving revenue, but actually to implementing sustainable mechanisms in our product to mitigate bias. Okay. And again, one can argue that we don't have to do that we have to do that as a smaller company, but you don't get brownie points for doing that because it doesn't show up on your balance sheet. So I just feel like it's so important that I tied it to our bonuses, and it propagated across the organization. And guess what? We prioritize it that way.
That's so inspiring, and it's good. And I don't know, you don't often hear about companies that really incentivize for diversity in or to combat bias in your algorithm. There is a question that came in as you were saying that from the audience. Julia says, how do we build a truly diverse forecast without including obvious biases that come from being human or from our data collection process, right? Our training set is our training set. So how do we expand or try and correct for those biases? So can we go a little bit deeper and be a little bit technical and nerdy? Like, how do you think about it? Do you look at the data coming in, and what do you do to kind of expand the horizon of the algorithm?
Four things. So first is the diversity of the data. So the quantity of the data matters, and that's what often people think about when we think about deep learning or machine learning. But the diversity of the samples in your data set matter. And it's complex because it's not just age, gender, ethnicity, glasses, no glasses. You then try to start combining all these factors together, and it becomes quite complex and very expensive to collect. So this is where new approaches like data synthesis and data simulation come into play. We're investing a lot of our mind share trying to crack that nut, because it will accelerate how we create data and have data. The second is the training algorithm, or it's like the data sampling algorithm. So again, if I have a ton of data, but at the end of the day, I'm training with just a small subpopulation or segment of that data set, and it's not diverse, that's a problem. So you have to have a balanced data set that has true representation across the factors you care about. So that's a second one. The third one is how you look at the results. And I find that so interesting. So if you go back and look at my PhD dissertation from 2005, I just reported one accuracy score per metric. So accuracy of smile is 96%, frown 94%. That's no longer good enough, because it's so easy to hide biases on specific subpopulations if you just report one accuracy. So now we break it down by subpopulation to try and uncover these hidden biases. So that, and then if we find that, we go back to the training, the drawing board, the training board, and retrain the algorithm with different data. And then the last one is, again, I'll put a plug in for the diversity of the team developing this, because, we have a pretty diverse team. And so when we're trying to test the accuracy of a classifier, we pull it's our team who's testing it. And we, maybe you wear the hijab, does it work on you or not, right? Or you have like a big facial beard, or you're dark skinned. Like, if it doesn't work on you, then we're not going to release that product. So yeah. But it's definitely, I think it's actually, it's an exciting time to be in this space. There is a lot of innovation happening. And if we, hold ourselves to the right standards, I think we'll be able to solve it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I love those four. They're very concrete, very specific. And even something like looking at, as you say, accuracy, not just across the board on average, but dig into the subgroups and dig into the various ways to cut the data. And just having it top of mind, I think is really helpful. But I love those four that you describe. Again, I'm going to jump around from company tech to more personal. We're both dual citizens. I'm Israeli and American. I'm like your Adam. I was born here, but I'm back and forth at a very young age. You were born elsewhere, moved here, and got an American citizenship. We both have religion as a part of our identity, and I wonder how that identity, with all of its facets, shapes your leadership style. Like, is it something that you draw on every day? Where, this is something that you downplay. How do you kind of put it all together? I know that's a lot. Yeah.
That same question. I'm going to ask you that same question. Again, the process of writing the book allowed me to just really self-reflect and have to think about all of these things. I'm a very proud Egyptian and Arab. I'm very proud Muslim. It's a true part of my identity, even though my religious journey has, ebbs and flows. So I used to wear the hijab for 12 years. I wore it because I wanted to, and I took it off because I wanted to, right? Mm-hmm. People often assumed that I was forced to wear it. I was not. I was one of the very early women in my family to decide to put it on. And 12 years later, it just didn't feel right and it didn't feel me anymore. So I took it off. So I feel like, and my kids identify in the same way. We're very proud of our two homes and our two our multiple identities, I guess. For me, it's about a bridge. Like I tell people, often I meet people here in the United States who have never traveled to the Middle East. So I'm the only Middle Eastern woman they've ever met. And I feel like I'm an ambassador, right? An ambassador to people back home. And then vice versa. When I go back to Egypt, a lot of people in Egypt have not really traveled to the United States and have a lot of misconceptions around what it's like to be American. And I try to demystify that. And So for me, I've reconciled the two. I love the open-mindedness and the innovation mindset and the risk-taking mindset of the United States. It's incredible. And this message that, you can be whoever you want to, like, really, that's not really the message you hear back in the Middle East often, at least in Egypt. So I love that. And we have totally embraced that as a family. But at the same time, the warmth and the generosity and the human connection, the compassion, that these are values, that the hard work ethic. I mean, that's universal, I guess. But these were drilled into my brain as a kid, and I've brought those over to the U.S. I'll say one more thing, and then I want to hear your answer. But sometimes they're at odds, right? And throughout my journey, this message of empowerment has come at odds with, family decisions I've had to make, and where I draw the line. And it's ever evolving. But I don't want to pretend that these tensions aren't there. They're there.
Yeah. And it's hard because in a way you had to prioritize, it resonates with me in the sense that to find my path and to succeed in my career and to become the leader that I am today, my family is back home and they are in Israel and I miss them dearly. And it does create this tension that you walk around with all the time. But I feel like you being proud of my identity and talking about it pretty openly. Give some authenticity to my leadership or how I can connect with different people around me. So yes, I have a religion and I'll talk about it. And yes, I believe that it's important for me, and I'm happy to engage in conversations. And yes, I have dual citizenship, and I think of other perspectives of other countries, which again is the diversity perspective, that not everything that you see on one side is the same on the other side. Or I think it helps me get some outside perspective in certain situations. And that goes, as you say, both ways. When I'm here making choices, either as a leader or as an academic or as a mother and a wife, or at home in Israel when I'm at home. But still, I'm proud of what I've accomplished here. We have a bunch. Yeah, go ahead.
We have a bunch of questions.
We do, but go ahead.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're a misfit?
You talk about misfits sometimes, or I was going to ask you a question about that. I don't necessarily feel like I'm a misfit. I think it's like when you dig deep and you're like looking to give yourself a little bit of a special, your personal identity, and you're like trying to get something to connect with yourself. I don't know if you have those moments when you're looking in the mirror and you're giving yourself that pep talk, or you're digging deep, and it's part of who you are, right? And so it's this thing that I empower myself, and not quite a misfit, but special. I'll kind of use a different word.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
And you talk about the risk taking, and I think in the field that you're in as a practitioner, or even that I touch upon as an academic, that need for risk taking and constantly not having misfits, but having special people with different backgrounds and identities, and being willing to step out of their comfort zone. In Israel, we call that chutzpah. I don't know if you've ever heard that term. It's a really well-known term. It's colloquial. It's chutzpah is like the dare, but it's like the dare with a cheeky dare. It's like,
I like it. I'm going to write it down.
That chutzpah is like at the heart of what people claim is the Israeli innovative culture. And so the whole startup nation idea. And so I feel like places that create a lot of innovation, like the Silicon Valley or the MIT Media Lab, they try to create that environment where people will have the chutzpah. They'll have that tendency to speak out, to say something a little bit out of the blue, to come at it from a different direction, or to try something new. And that really inspires innovation.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Okay, let me read some questions. There's so many questions. I don't know if we're going to get to all of them, but thank you all for sending in your questions from the audience. Let me go up and see. Jack Walsh asks around questions of how do you keep ethics in the forefront when data science and optimization, data science and data and analytics is all about optimization. And we at Darden here care a lot about ethics. It's a school that has a core course. I'm taking Jack's words and adding some context to it. Darden offers, in the core set of courses, we have a course on ethics. And again, Ed, one of the professors is Ed. There's a bunch of other amazing professors in that field that work with our students as future leaders to think about how important the ethical question is. Data science, I teach data science. We have other professors, amazing professors who teach data science for our coding, data, optimization, efficiency. How do you balance the two? It's a great question.
Great question, Jack. I think it's all about taking this human-centric lens on everything we do that's tech-related. And I think it's been missing, from how we think about data and technology. It's I don't know if anybody's seen The Social Dilemma. If you haven't, it's just really, nothing in it is really new, but it's just fascinating to watch these people who invented the like button or or Gmail talk about how they optimize the algorithm for, time spent on the platform, for engagement, but not necessarily for human well-being and mental health, right? So I think we have to change our KPIs and change the optimization function. We have to think about a human-centric optimization function or, functions. So I think we have to weave in conversations of ethics. It can't be when I studied computer science, it was computer science, and philosophical thinking on the side, or it was just so detached and decoupled from my core kind of study of computer science and technology. And now it has to just be super weaved in. And MIT, for example, their new college of, I forget the exact name of it, but it's very AI focused, is trying to bring a multidisciplinary approach and put ethics at the, prioritize ethics.
Yeah. And I think that I like your idea of KPIs, changing the KPIs. And I like your idea of the fact that we can, in a way, and it sounds, maybe it will cringe to some people's ear, but we can program the ethics into our routines, right?
Right.
If we can try to find ways to model it and to measure it, and then we can actually keep track of it. So we're not just up to optimizing around mean squared error or whatever it is that our algorithm is looking at, but we can find other measures to improve on. Great. So that was a great answer. Let me go to Scott's question here. Scott says that in New York City, he's in New York City. He's coming in from New York City. There is Link New York City free Wi-Fi kiosks around the city where payphones used to be used, but each one now has 3 cameras. And is there any concern about facial recognition and potential abuse? You're very passionate about privacy issues. What is your thinking around that? How do you feel about these, cameras everywhere, all the time?
So I'm a huge advocate for thoughtful regulation. I think we need to see regulation around these technologies. When we first started Affectiva, Ross Picard, my co-founder, who's the MIT professor, and myself, we sat around her kitchen table and we kind of acknowledged that there are so many use cases of this technology, and we wanted to define a number of core values that inform our business strategy, and privacy was at the top of the list, and just consenting and appreciating that this is very private data and personal data. And we essentially decided we weren't going to entertain any business that did not explicitly require people's consent and opt-in, which maybe these phones don't do, which meant that we have over the years turned away millions and millions of dollars of potential revenue and investment.
Yeah. You mentioned in your book like $40 million that was offered and you put it aside because people couldn't consent to being recorded, right?
Because the use case was a surveillance use case, and we did not want to go there. So we're part of a consortium called the Partnership on AI. Check them out, where together we're advocating for this thoughtful regulation and fair, accountable, transparent, and ethical AI.
That's inspiring. And maybe we can share with the audience somehow, maybe I'll grab it from you afterwards, a link to that so people can read about that consortium and understand what kind of activities you're taking. But it's definitely going to be harder and harder, I think, to avoid cameras and videos everywhere around us. And it's something that we all need to be thinking about. A slightly different question. It comes from an anonymous viewer in the Ukraine. So again, we're international, which is great. It's more personal, I guess, in the sense of, and it's for both of us, so we both get to answer this one. Which 3 pieces of advice would you give yourself in your 20s?
Ooh. Oh, do you want to go first?
Oof. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. I think when I was in my 20s, I remember my older sister telling me that that's really when you get to know yourself. Like that is the real puberty, right? Like in your 20s. So 20s was an interesting period. I think I would say, like, to some degree, do what you're doing. Like, I think I enjoyed myself. I found a good balance of being passionate about what I was doing, but like have faith that you're on the right track. And even if you're making some mistakes, that's fine. They will all eventually be beneficial to you long term, meaning you'll learn from those mistakes. So go with the flow. I would say tell the people that you're close to that you love them more often than you do. And I would say don't get so stressed out. I think sometimes I get overstressed about situations in the moment, and I'm learning over the years to step back. And the pandemic, in a way, has kind of helped because it puts things in perspective. But yeah.
I love these.
What about you?
I think for me, and by the way, having faith is one that really resonates with me. So I'll maybe that will be one of my 3. I think for me, like in my 20s, I just thought the solution to everything was just working harder. And I've learned over the years that, first of all, you want to invest in your network, right? So I've only started to do that more recently in my career. And I just think, and investing in your network doesn't mean you're only connecting with people who are going to benefit you. And it's just like make friends, take every conversation. You never know where it's going to lead, right? And just be open. So I feel like I wish I would have invested more in my social network and my business and professional network. And then the second is self-care. I mean, honestly, in my 20s, with my PhD and then starting Affectiva, I did not prioritize self-care, and I didn't eat well, I didn't sleep well, I didn't exercise, I didn't make time to exercise. I still fall back into this pattern occasionally, especially with the pandemic and just being home all the time. But now on my calendar, and it's a public calendar for everybody at the company to see, I have a block of time on Friday mornings for Zumba class. You cannot schedule on top of that no matter what. And I think that's important for my team to know. It's important for my kids to see that I'm making some, I'm a single mom. My ex is all the way back in Egypt. So I just think it sets a good example, and it gives people permission too. Like, it gives people permission on my team to block out time to go for a bike or a run or do laundry, right? Right, as we're all like stuck at home. So self-care would be my second one. And then my third one is around faith and just believing in yourself. Don't be your own biggest kind of Debbie Downer. I've done that so many times in my life, where the narrative in my brain is like, oh, you can't do that. Oh, you're going to totally fail. Or you should not like do that. Everybody's going to, look down on you or whatever. Like, just, don't be your own biggest obstacle, I guess.
Yeah, I hear you. Yep. Well, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that. I wish we had more time. I'm going to take a couple more questions, but I'll tell you that the ways in which the stories that you shared around how the technology has really penetrated different areas of individual lives, folks that are working again on developing applications for Alzheimer, or working with kids that are on the autism spectrum, they're so special. And I suspect for you, it's kind of acknowledgement that you were in the right direction all those years ago, right? Where are things headed for you in Affectiva moving forward?
So we're on this mission of humanizing technology. We're focused on, and there's actually a Harvard Business School case study on us, because, from a business strategy, do we develop a platform play where we affect and kind of, we're able to apply our technology to all industries, or do we go deep in a few? And we've explored both, and now we're focused on the automotive and the advertising space. We do support some of the mental health applications that you mentioned, because I just think we have to, but we're not focused on it as a company. I think as I think about the next few years, getting our technology into cars to make sure our roads are safer and help us reimagine what the future of mobility looks like, that's something I'm excited about. And then I've just really started to think, especially with the book out, like maybe there's an opportunity to start a venture fund that is focused on, building and supporting empathetic technology, right, across different verticals in social robotics, mental health, education, video conferencing. So I'm toying with that idea. This is totally unscripted. This is probably the first time I'm mentioning this live. So
we're getting it unscripted. It is unscripted after all.
Now you all have to hold me accountable to making that happen. But I'm just starting to think about, okay, where's this technology going to go in the next 10 years? And what's my role as a voice and a platform to make that happen?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And such a hard dilemma for a CEO or for the company in general, the leadership, to decide. And I know that Shane, who wrote the case with you, is really enjoying teaching it, because it's a deep one for the students to dig their teeth into. I'll take a great question here from my friend Muhammad Ranjbar. He's from Iran. He and I were, like you described, all those years, you have found colleagues in different PhD labs. He and I worked side by side in our PhD. He's in Tehran, and we keep in touch over the years. And he's asking around, what would you recommend kids today learn in terms of software or technology? How do we prepare the generation that is coming to cope with the future? And I'll add to it, not only from a technical perspective, but also from like a diversity and mindset perspective. How do we get them there?
Yeah, as you can imagine, this is something I again, very passionate about. So there's a lot of material out there if kids want to get kind of their hands dirty with coding and programming. Obviously, Coursera, Udemy, Khan Academy, depending on the age of the kids. But for me, what I found to be like most interesting is taking a design thinking approach. So for here in Massachusetts, we have a number of camps that are all about leveraging 3D printing, laser cutting, Arduino programming, Python programming to solve a problem. So it's less about the technology and it's more around design thinking. How do we create, define a problem, come up with a solution, build the solution, iterate, get feedback, and so on. So I'm happy to share some resources here in the US, but I'm sure there's some around the world as well.
So maybe getting kids and doing hackathons or kids.
Totally. One more thing too. So my 11-year-old who he plays a lot of video games, which it's his way of connecting with his friends and keeping in touch during this pandemic. But I encourage my kids to also not think of technology as just users, but as creators. So he's been doing this for a year now. He started a podcast. And I know nothing about podcasts. So he has had to teach himself all the skills, all the tools. He watches all these YouTube videos on how to record and edit and then publish it. So it's been just amazing watching him take that on and own it and learn and create with technology. So think of technology as a tool for expression and creation, not just as consumers.
That's a great direction for our kids, and a lot of what you're describing, my kids are doing in their own way. My daughter's taking an architectural class at NYU, and she's there.
How old is your daughter?
She's young, but she has all these they have special programs. She loves it. My son is doing also gaming and connecting with his friends back in Cambridge through the games in ways that I don't understand, but in a way they kind of again seize the moment of COVID in ways that I think sometimes for us is harder to do. I have a follow-up question, and then I'll go to one last question, if that's okay. By the way, we have people here from Trinidad and Tobago, Turkey, Egypt, Nigeria, Romania, Iran, and so many countries around the world. We have if diversity was a topic that we're passionate about, we've accomplished that in this session. So again, thank you for coming. Related to COVID, do you see that the fact that everybody's on Zoom all day long and folks are interacting, is that affecting your ability to develop faster your technology, your Affectiva technology? Yeah,
I think we're going, one of the silver linings of this is we're going to see a lot more interest in technology like ours because we're presenting to this, hundreds of people from all over the world, but you and I can't see them and we can't see if they're engaged in our conversation. I mean, hopefully you are all engaged, but it seems that way. But imagine if we had Emotion AI integrated and you don't have to turn your webcam on, but if the technology had access to your face video without sending it anywhere, and then we could see an aggregate curve of level of engagement. Like when we said something funny, did people laugh or not? Are they confused? Are they engaged? I think that would create more of a sense of a shared experience. So I think we're going to see a ton of innovation that leverages this, human-centric technology and how we connect and communicate.
I know that professors are going to love, some might love, some might not.
Right.
We need to know, or we want to improve our delivery, especially in this online world. And it's been challenging for many faculty to find out, how do they want to do the online classes? How are they using Zoom? Are they just talking at the camera? Some people are, everybody's muted, but they ask like a handful of folks to unmute themselves. So there is background noise. Like I've heard professors do that. So you have 5 students on a rotation that they're unmuted. So you get some laughter or you get some reaction. So I think if your tool was integrated, that would really add to that experience. Last question that I'm going to ask from let me see, I saw it here. Saloni was asking, how do you deal with rejection? Like, how do you pick yourself up after something failed or something didn't work? You've submitted grants that have been denied. You've tried to get accepted.
Pitch investors.
Pitch to investors and the silence. We get papers rejected all the time as an academic. It is really not the fun part of our job. How do you pick yourself up and keep going?
I think you have to take a moment to kind of acknowledge that it's a bummer, right? You have to kind of just grieve for a little bit. But then I find that I have to connect with why I'm doing this, right? I go back to why am I so passionate about this and what's driving me, right? And when I reconnect with that sense of purpose and mission, I'm on the go again. I also find that I take pride in looking at my team and watching them develop professionally and personally, and I, and a lot of my mentees too, who where because of something I did, or because of our connecting together, they've changed the way they approach their career, or how they make decisions, and that inspires me too and keeps me going.
I just thought about, as you were describing, again, I learn every time that you and I interact, but um, I'm have a very strong connection and bond with the alums, the students that have been students of mine in my classroom, and then they've graduated and moved on. And, I've been a professor for over 11 years now. And so I have many generations. I could open the drawer and show you. I keep all their seating charts, all their faces, so I can quickly look at it like my Rolodex. But maybe one of the reasons I'm now thinking that it's such a passion of mine and I get so much energy from that is because it helps me deal with the other sides of my job, like the papers being rejected, right? Yes, the paper gets these really harsh reviews from somebody who read it, and it's been a 2-year work of mine, and it's really not always easy to stomach. But then connecting with alums who I know have taken a lot from the experience at Darden, taken a lot from my classroom specifically, or just our relationship, have gone on to do amazing things. It really empowers me. It gives me energy to wake up tomorrow and do it again, right? And so I think that that's a really interesting
It's
way.
about the people at the end of the
Yeah.
day, right?
Totally
Yeah,
about the people.
yeah.
Totally about the people. And I think that that's a perfect place for us to end. It's 2:02. There's so many more questions that unfortunately we don't have time to answer, but I want to thank everybody for joining. I thank you, Rana, so much for your time and for your just being awesome like always. It's really a
It was
pleasure.
so awesome. It was great, and thank you for all the questions and the engagement from everybody who attended.
Yes, thank you
Stay
so much.
well.
Be well.